Welcome to today's live with SOTSIM trustees as well as the guests. I would like to introduce you to our amazing moderator. Her name is Mucha Nyandoro, and thank you so much for agreeing to moderate this, Mucha.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Karen. Right, so everybody, welcome to our first live session. As you heard, my thinking in this battle against COVID-19 is that we have this enemy whose strongest weapons are fear, intimidation, destruction. And in order to be effective, we obviously need strategies and tactics that work. So we have an amazing panel of generals in the battlefield against COVID-19. Darlington, there'll be a segment of people who assume that St. Anne's is an elitist hospital by virtue of its location and the bodies behind SOTSIM. Could you reassure the Zimbabwean community that it isn't?
Good point, Mucha.
On testing, you are in a prime position as a immunologist to understand the trends globally around the character, if you like, of COVID and initiatives around testing and ensuring that populations are kept safe and know what their medical profile is. What would you describe as the most efficient, or what do you see Zimbabwe assuming on the testing front?
Yeah, thank you, Mucha. I think that's a really important question and a very challenging question.
Okay, so Mucha, with concerns that many might have, i.e. we're in lockdown, supply chains have been cut off, we're concerned that we don't actually have the equipment required to test for COVID-19. I know that you're quite heavily involved on the pharmaceutical side and on supply chain. Could you give us an update on what you've been doing in that space?
Thanks, Mucha.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of Zoom In, where I have got the modern-day gladiators in the way of rugby players. I'd like to introduce you to our guest tonight. Tonight's session for me really was inspired. I think we've seen a lot of change happen in the world. COVID-19 has disrupted absolutely everything, sport included. And I think for professional athletes, there is typically an association with you guys, especially with rugby players. You're at the 10s, you're at the 7s, you're clearly traveling most of your life, I'm sure. And one begs the question, what happens when the world comes to a standstill? And what does that mean for you individually? Wondering why we are talking about the rise of drone technologies in Africa. I mentioned to our guests behind the screens that my association with drones is war-related stuff, i.e. drones being sent out to blow up a village and the bad guys. But actually, as you begin to learn more and more about these technologies, you start to understand that they are actually being used for social good and for real projects that make an impact, like transferring medical equipment across remote areas. Precision agriculture is another one that pops out only too often. So we hear the Rwanda story. Anytime you Google drone technologies in Africa, Zipline pops up, right? It's almost this pioneering brand that was trusted by government to roll out a program that's been quite impactful. And then you see case studies, Malawi's now got the first African drone academy, Cote d'Ivoire come in with this agri-drone type focus. Is there a requirement for a progressive government in order to support these technologies? Because if you don't have that relationship between air traffic control and you don't have the relationship, with funders, or there's just such a detailed ecosystem that's required for drones to work successfully. Do you think that the continent is ready at a larger scale than some of these kind of case studies that we read about